My name is Ophelia, and I'm 32 years old. I dedicated 15 years of my life to my father's logging business, while my brother Jackson built his fancy life in New York. When Dad got sick, Jackson suddenly reappeared acting like the devoted son. At the will reading, he leaned over and whispered, "Don't worry, I'll find you a nice apartment after I get the house and business." I kept quiet. But when the lawyer started reading Dad's final wishes, Jackson's smug smile vanished in an instant. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you've ever been underestimated by family, hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this story ends. I grew up in a small town in rural Montana, where the scent of fresh pine and sawdust was as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. Our family owned Thomas Miller, logging a company my father had built from nothing but determination and calloused hands. Dad started with just one truck and a chainsaw, eventually growing the operation into one of the most respected logging companies in the state. My mother, Catherine, was the gentler counterbalance to Dad's gruff exterior. She kept our home warm and welcoming, a sanctuary from the rough business world Dad navigated daily. I still remember her homemade bread and the way she'd sing while tending to her garden. But we lost her to breast cancer when I was just 14, leaving a void in our family that nothing could ever truly fill. Jackson was 4 years older than me, and from as early as I can remember, he was the golden child. He had Dad's strong jaw, Mum's charismatic smile, and a natural confidence that drew people to him. In high school, he was the star quarterback, homecoming king, and honor student, all rolled into one charming package. Everyone in town knew Jackson Miller was destined for greatness beyond our little logging community. I, on the other hand, was the practical one. While Jackson scored touchdowns, I kept score in the logbooks. While he charmed teachers and classmates, I quietly maintained a 4.0 GPA. I wasn't invisible exactly, but I existed in Jackson's shadow, the reliable daughter who could be counted on when glamour wasn't required. After Mum died, our family dynamic shifted. Dad threw himself into work, and Jackson became increasingly restless. I stepped into the gap, taking over more household responsibilities and spending weekends at the logging office, learning the business operations. Not because I dreamed of running a logging company, but because someone had to care, and it clearly wasn't going to be Jackson. "Ophelia, come see this inventory system," Dad would say, his voice gruff but patient. "You need to understand how we track every load from forest to mill," and so I learned. I absorbed everything Dad taught me about sustainable logging practices, equipment maintenance, client relationships, and forest management. Initially, I thought Dad was teaching me because Jackson wasn't interested. Only years later did I realize he was actually grooming me in his own quiet way. Jackson left for college in New York when I was 16, and with each passing semester, his visits home became shorter and less frequent. After graduation, he took a job with an investment firm in Manhattan, and Montana became little more than a footnote in his biography. He called on holidays and sent expensive but impersonal gifts for birthdays. Meanwhile, I postponed my own dreams. I had earned a scholarship to an art school in Seattle. My watercolor landscapes had won state competitions, and my art teacher had called me the most promising talent to come out of this town in decades. But 2 weeks before I was supposed to leave, Dad had his first heart attack. "It's nothing," he insisted from his hospital bed. "Just a warning shot. You go on to that fancy art school. Jackson's gone, and you deserve your shot too." But I saw the fear behind his eyes and the mountain of paperwork on his bedside table. The business was at a critical juncture, expanding into new territory with significant loans to pay off. He needed help, even if he wouldn't admit it. So I deferred my scholarship. Just for a year, I told myself. 1 year turned into 2, then 5, then 15. The scholarship money went to business courses at the local community college instead. I learned accounting, business management, and forestry sciences. My paintbrushes dried up and their case taken out only occasionally on quiet Sunday afternoons. During those 15 years, I watched from Facebook as Jackson built his glossy life in New York. He married Audrey, a former model turned interior designer, bought a penthouse in Manhattan, and posted photos from vacations in the Maldives and wine tours in Tuscany. Occasionally, he'd call with unsolicited advice about how we should be running the business. "Timber's going digital, Ophelia," he'd say. "Dad needs to get with the times." Meanwhile, I was the one helping Dad navigate the actual challenges. New environmental regulations, increased competition, rising fuel costs, and the constant struggle to find reliable workers. I was the one who modernized our accounting system, negotiated better rates with our buyers, and helped Dad implement more sustainable logging practices that ultimately won us valuable contracts with eco-conscious builders. I put my personal life on hold too. Ryan, my high school sweetheart, who had become a civil engineer, proposed to me when we were 24, but the timing never seemed right for a wedding. There was always some new crisis at the company, some reason to postpone. Ryan was patient, understanding that my family obligations came first, but I saw the disappointment in his eyes each time we pushed back our plans. The business needs me right now, I'd explain. Just a little longer. Dad never asked me to make these sacrifices. In fact, he occasionally urged me to get out there and live a little. But I saw how he relied on me, how his face would relax when I handled a difficult client or resolved a logistical nightmare. And I knew, without him ever saying it, that he was grateful. His appreciation came in small ways. A gruff, "good job," after I secured a major contract. The keys to a new truck on my 30th birthday. The way he started introducing me as my daughter Ophelia, who keeps this whole operation running. He wasn't demonstrative, but in his own way he was acknowledging my place in the business and in his life. And so day by day, year by year, I became an integral part of Thomas Miller Logging. The workers respected me, the clients knew me, and despite the paths not taken, I found a certain satisfaction in what we built together. If not the life I had once imagined for myself, it was still a life of value and purpose. Then 3 days after my 32nd birthday, Dad was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctor gave him 6 months at most. The day we received Dad's diagnosis remains etched in my memory with painful clarity. The sterile smell of the hospital, the doctor's compassionate but clinical tone, and the way Dad's weathered hand gripped mine just a little tighter than usual. He didn't cry or rage against the unfairness. He simply nodded, asked a few practical questions about treatment options, and then said, "Well, I'd better get my affairs in order." I immediately rearranged my life to care for him. I converted our family home's downstairs study into a bedroom so he wouldn't have to navigate the stairs. I researched oncologists, drove him to appointments, managed his medications, and still kept the business running, often working late into the night after Dad had gone to sleep. 3 weeks after the diagnosis, Jackson called. I was sitting beside Dad's bed reviewing some contracts while he dozed when my phone lit up with my brother's name for the first time in months. "How bad is it?" Jackson asked, skipping any greeting. I stepped into the hallway to avoid waking Dad. "It's pancreatic, stage 4. They're saying 6 months, but..." My voice broke. There was a long silence before Jackson said, "I'm coming home." I was genuinely surprised. "You are?" "Of course I am. He's my father too, Ophelia." 2 days later, Jackson arrived in a rented luxury SUV, looking like he'd stepped out of a men's fashion magazine. Designer jeans, cashmere sweater, expensive watch glinting on his wrist. His presence filled our modest family home in a way that made it suddenly seem smaller, shabbier. The reunion at the hospital was uncomfortable. Dad was having a rough day, pale and exhausted from his first round of chemotherapy. But when Jackson walked in, Dad's face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. "Look who's here," I said, forcing brightness into my voice. "My boy," Dad said, his voice weak but filled with pride. "You came all this way." "Of course I did," Jackson replied, taking Dad's hand. Nothing could keep me away. I stepped back, watching as Jackson charmed the nurses, consulted with the doctors, using medical terminology he'd clearly Googled on the flight over, and reminisced with Dad about fishing trips and ball games from years past. It was as if I had suddenly become invisible, a feeling that would become increasingly familiar in the weeks to come. Jackson extended his 2-day visit indefinitely, taking a leave of absence from his job in New York. Audrey joined him a week later, bringing an air of Manhattan sophistication to our small Montana town. They took over the guest bedroom in Dad's house, while I continued living in my small cabin on the property, a place I'd built with my own savings 5 years earlier to give myself some independence while still remaining close to Dad. At first, I was genuinely grateful for Jackson's presence. Caring for a terminally ill parent is exhausting, and having someone to share the burden seemed like a blessing. But it quickly became apparent that Jackson's idea of helping was selective. He was happy to accompany Dad to appointments where he could play the devoted son in front of medical staff. He eagerly reconnected with old friends and business associates around town, accepting their sympathy and admiration for coming home in his father's time of need. But he was nowhere to be found during the midnight medication doses, the cleanup after bouts of sickness, the endless loads of laundry, or the painstaking recording of symptoms and side effects. More troubling was his immediate interest in the business. The day after his arrival, he showed up at the logging company office, introducing himself to newer employees who didn't know him and reacquainting himself with the old-timers. Just getting a feel for the operation, he explained when I found him reviewing our financial statements. I think Dad would want me to understand what he's built. I might have believed his sudden interest was genuine if I hadn't overheard him on the phone one evening speaking to someone in New York. The land alone is worth millions, he said in a hushed tone. The equipment we could liquidate, and there's a corporate outfit looking to expand in this region that might take the client list and contracts. We could have everything wrapped up by year's end. My blood ran cold. He was already planning to sell the business the moment Dad was gone. 15 years of my life, Dad's entire legacy reduced to assets to be liquidated. When I confronted him, Jackson was unrepentant. It's just business, Ophelia. Dad built this company to provide for his family, and that's what selling it would do. You could finally have a life outside of this backwater town. Isn't that what you wanted once, to be an artist or something? The fact that he didn't even remember what my dreams had been told me everything I needed to know about how much attention he'd paid to my life. The tension between us grew as Dad's health declined. Jackson organized an elaborate dinner at the town's best restaurant, inviting Dad's oldest friends and business associates. It should have been a lovely evening, a chance for Dad to enjoy good company while he still could. Instead, it became the Jackson show. Remember when Dad taught me to drive the loader? Jackson regaled the table. I was 14? He said I had a natural talent for it. Dad beamed at the memory, while I sat silently knowing it had been me who spent countless summers learning every piece of equipment in the yard. Jackson had tried once, nearly tipped the loader, and never showed interest again. And those all-nighters we pulled during the Anderson contract, Jackson continued. Dad and me working side by side to meet that deadline. I nearly choked on my water. Jackson had been in New York during the Anderson contract. It was Dad and I who had worked through 3 consecutive nights to fulfill that crucial order after 2 of our drivers came down with flu. But Dad didn't correct him, whether from the fog of medication, the pleasure of having his son home, or simply the desire to keep peace. Dad smiled and nodded along to Jackson's revised history. You always did have a head for the business, Dad told Jackson. Got my instincts. I excused myself to the restroom where I splashed cold water on my face and fought back tears. Had Dad forgotten everything I'd done, or had he always seen Jackson as his true successor, despite all evidence to the contrary? As weeks passed and Dad's condition worsened, my anxiety about the future grew. I had always assumed, without it ever being explicitly stated, that the business would come to me. Not out of entitlement, but as a natural progression after 15 years of investment and apprenticeship. Now with Jackson's return and Dad's obvious delight in his presence, I wasn't so sure. I tried to discuss it with Dad one afternoon when we were alone, Jackson having gone to take care of some business matters, which I suspected meant another call about potential buyers. Dad, I was wondering if we should talk about after, I said cautiously, adjusting his blanket. About the company and the house and everything. Dad looked tired. Everything's taken care of, Ophelia. It's all in the will. Harold has it all documented. Harold Jameson had been our family lawyer for decades. He had helped Dad set up the original company and had handled all our legal matters since. But Dad, Jackson's talking about selling the business. Is that what you want? After everything we've built? Dad closed his eyes. Jackson has his own ideas. Always has. But don't you worry. He squeezed my hand weakly. Just trust me, okay? It wasn't the reassurance I was looking for, but it was all I got. 2 days later, Dad slipped into a semi-conscious state as the cancer progressed to his liver. The doctors told us it wouldn't be long now. I maintained a vigil by his bedside, sleeping in a chair, leaving only when absolutely necessary. Jackson made appearances, bringing coffee for the nurses and making sure everyone noticed his presence, but he rarely stayed long. In what would turn out to be Dad's final conscious moment, he gripped my hand with surprising strength and pulled me closer. His lips moved, but I could barely hear the whispered words. My steady girl, I thought he said. Always knew. Then he drifted back into unconsciousness. He passed away peacefully that night, with me by his side. Jackson arrived 10 minutes after Dad had taken his last breath, having been out to dinner with some of Dad's business associates to discuss the future. When he saw that he was too late, genuine grief crossed his face for the first time since his return. In that moment, I glimpsed the brother I had once known before ambition and distance had changed him. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by the practical concerns of death. I'll handle the funeral arrangements, Jackson announced already on his phone. I know exactly what Dad would want. The days following Dad's death passed in a blur of arrangements and formalities. True to his word, Jackson took complete control of the funeral planning, consulting me only as an afterthought. The simple memorial service I knew Dad would have preferred became an elaborate affair with expensive flowers, catered reception, and Jackson as the chief mourner. My father was a great man. He eulogized, his voice breaking at just the right moments. He taught me everything I know about business, about integrity, about life. I sat in the front row, Ryan's hand steady in mine, listening to this stranger describe a relationship that existed primarily in Jackson's imagination. Dad had been a great man, but the father Jackson described bore little resemblance to the one I had known intimately through years of daily interaction. The church was packed with everyone from town, plus business associates from across the state. Many approached Jackson first with their condolences, naturally assuming that the son, rather than the daughter, was the primary griever and inheritor. I received secondary sympathies, often accompanied by well-meaning but painful questions. "Will you stay in town now that your dad's gone?" One of Dad's poker buddies asked me. "Such a shame you never got to pursue your own life," whispered an old teacher. "I'm sure your brother will find a place for you in whatever he decides to do with the company," said our biggest client, patting my hand. Throughout the reception, Jackson worked the room like a politician discussing the business with suppliers and clients, as if he already owned it. I overheard fragments of his plans, streamlining operations, exploring new markets, bringing modern management techniques. Audrey, elegant in designer black, sidled up to me with a champagne flute. "Jackson and I have been talking," she said in her cultured Manhattan accent. "There's a darling apartment building near us in the city. We'd be happy to help you find something there. A fresh start might be just what you need." "Don't!" I stared at her, momentarily speechless. "I have a home here," I finally managed. "And a job." Audrey tilted her head, her expression pitying. "Of course you do, honey. I just meant... Well, changes are coming, aren't they? And New York has so many opportunities for someone looking to finally start their life." She drifted away before I could respond, leaving me with the distinct impression that my future had already been decided without my input. The week following the funeral confirmed my fears. Jackson installed himself in Dad's office at the company headquarters, bringing in consultants from a corporate logging conglomerate to evaluate the operation. He scheduled meetings with our bank, our insurance company, and our major clients without including me. When I confronted him, he was dismissive. "This is all standard procedure, Ophelia. We need to understand the full value of the estate before any decisions are made. The estate is Dad's, not yours." Jackson smiled condescendingly. "And I'm his son and heir. Look, I know you've helped out around here, and that's great. Dad appreciated it, I'm sure. But this is business now, and business is what I do." At the house, the situation was equally disturbing. I arrived one afternoon to find Jackson and Audrey directing movers, who were packing up items from my childhood bedroom. "What's going on?" I demanded. "Just organizing things," Audrey explained breezily. "This room would make a perfect home office for Jackson when we visit." "When you visit, this is still Dad's house. Nothing has been decided yet." Jackson emerged from Dad's study carrying a box of papers. "Actually, I've been talking with Harold. As the male heir, the family home traditionally passes to me. It's what Dad would have wanted." I knew this was nonsense. Montana had no laws favoring male heirs, and Dad had never expressed such old-fashioned views. But Jackson's confidence made me doubt myself. What if Dad had made promises to him that I didn't know about? What if all my years of service counted for nothing in the face of traditional family structures? That night alone in my cabin, I broke down completely. For the first time since Dad's diagnosis, I allowed myself to truly grieve, not only for him, but for the potential loss of everything I had worked for. I sobbed into my pillow, feeling more alone than I ever had before. The next morning, seeking connection to Dad, I went to his office at home, a space Jackson had yet to completely take over. In the quiet room that still smelled of Dad's pipe tobacco and leather chair, I found his old journal in a desk drawer. I had never invaded his privacy by reading it before, but now I needed some guidance, some insight into what he had really wanted. Most entries were brief notes about business matters or weather conditions that affected logging. But toward the back, I found an entry from just 6 months ago. "Ophelia secured the Westridge contract today. Biggest deal we've ever landed. She's got more business sense than I ever had, though she doesn't see it. Jackson called from New York about investing some company funds in some scheme of his. Had to remind him the company isn't his to direct. Not yet, and maybe not ever, the way he's going. Made some changes to the will today after talking with Harold. It's the right thing to do." My hands trembled as I read his words. Dad had seen me, really seen me, and my contributions. Whatever Jackson might believe about his birthright, Dad had been considering a different path. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. The 2 weeks following the funeral were a study in contrasts. While I retreated to my cabin and the company office trying to keep operations running smoothly, despite my grief, Jackson enacted what appeared to be a fully formed takeover plan. He moved into the main house, completely rearranging furniture and replacing family photos with abstract art pieces Audrey had shipped from their New York apartment. He took over Dad's master bedroom, his study, even his parking space at the company lot. I avoided direct confrontation, partly out of exhaustion and partly out of a growing sense that the best strategy was to wait for the official will reading. If Dad had indeed made the changes his journal suggested, fighting with Jackson now would only waste energy I desperately needed to conserve. The most troubling development was Jackson's discovery of Dad's locked safe in his home office closet. I had known about it, of course, had even seen Dad access it occasionally for important documents, but had respected his privacy about its contents. "We need to get this open," Jackson announced when he found it. "There could be important papers in here, stock certificates, bearer bonds, who knows. Harold probably has the combination," I suggested. "We should wait until the official reading," Jackson scoffed. "That's 3 days away. We don't need to wait for some legal formality to access our own father's possessions." "Actually, legally, we do," I countered. "Until the will is read and executorship established, we shouldn't be making any unilateral decisions." This devolved into a heated argument that ended with Jackson storming out threatening to call a locksmith. Whether he actually did, I never found out. The safe remained closed until the reading. The night before the appointment with Harold Jackson hosted what amounted to a business dinner in Dad's house. He invited the management team from the logging company, our 3 biggest clients, and representatives, from Northland Timber, the corporate logging giant I suspected he was negotiating with for a sale. I received my invitation via text message 3 hours before the event. Business dinner at the house 7 p.m. Wear something professional. The presumption that he could command my presence in my childhood home as if I were a subordinate rather than a co-heir was infuriating. But I decided to attend anyway, if only to monitor whatever plans he was setting in motion. The dinner was exactly as I feared. Jackson, seated at the head of the table in Dad's chair, led discussions about exciting new directions for Thomas Miller Logging. He spoke of efficiencies, capital investments, and strategic partnerships, all while Audrey poured wine and smiled approvingly. During dessert, Jackson raised his glass. "To my father, who built a solid foundation that I intend to take to the next level. Thomas Miller Logging is entering a new era." Glasses clinked around the table while I sat with my hands in my lap, unable to participate in this premature coronation. As coffee was being served, Jackson sidled up to me in a rare moment away from his audience. "Don't worry," he whispered, his breath smelling of expensive scotch. "I'll keep you on as an employee. Accounts receivable, maybe. You're good with the small details." Before I could respond, he added with a smirk, "I know you need the job. That little art hobby of yours was never going to pay the bills." He walked away, rejoining his admiring crowd, leaving me frozen in place. It took every ounce of self-control not to throw my coffee cup at his smug face. That night, unable to sleep, I pulled out old photo albums and spent hours looking at images of our family when it was whole. Mom, Dad, Jackson and me at Yellowstone. Dad teaching me to fish. Mum helping me with a school project. Jackson and Dad building a treehouse. These fragments of a happier time made my current situation even more painful by contrast. Near dawn, I came across a letter I had forgotten about tucked into one of the albums. It was from Dad, written on my 25th birthday. The part that caught my eye read, "You've grown into a woman of remarkable strength and integrity. Every day I'm grateful you chose to stay and help an old man with his business. You've made it better than I ever could alone. Never doubt your value to the company or to me." I clutched the letter to my chest, tears streaming down my face. Whatever happened at the will reading, I knew the truth of my relationship with Dad. I had to hold on to that regardless of what legal documents might say. In the morning, exhausted but resolved, I spoke with Ryan by phone. He had been my rock throughout this ordeal, offering support without pressure, advice without judgment. "What's your worst-case scenario?" he asked practically. "Jackson gets everything. The house, the business, all of it. I'm left with nothing to show for 15 years of my life. And if that happens," I took a deep breath. "Then we start over, together. Maybe it's time anyway." Ryan's voice softened. "I'm with you whatever happens. But Ophelia, your father wasn't blind or stupid. He saw what you did for him for the business. Have a little faith." Faith was in short supply as Jackson drove us to Harold's office that afternoon. He spent the entire journey talking about his plans for the business, the house, even Dad's vintage truck collection. He showed me brochures for condominiums in town. "I thought you might like something like this," he said, handing me glossy pages showing a sterile-looking apartment complex. "It's got a doorman and everything. Very safe for a single woman." I said nothing, watching the familiar landscape pass by the window. The mountains were dusted with early snow, the aspens a brilliant gold against the evergreens. Whatever happened in Harold's office, this would always be my home. Harold's office was in a converted Victorian house downtown. The conference room was modest but comfortable with a large oak table and leather chairs. Harold himself was in his 60s, balding and bespectacled with kind eyes and a deliberate manner of speaking. To my surprise, Jackson had brought reinforcements. Audrey was there, of course, but also his friend Scott, a financial advisor from New York and a young lawyer I didn't recognize. I had come alone, though Ryan had offered to accompany me. This was family business, and I would face it on my own terms. "Thank you all for coming," Harold began formally. "We're here to read the last will and testament of Thomas James Miller. Before we begin, I want to express my personal condolences. Tom was not just a client, but a dear friend." He placed a thick document on the table before him and adjusted his glasses. Jackson leaned forward eagerly, a confident smile playing on his lips. "The will is quite detailed, so I'll summarize the key points and then we can go through any questions," Harold continued. "The estate consists of the family home and surrounding property, Thomas Miller Logging Company, with all its assets and liabilities, various personal possessions, including vehicles and collections and financial accounts and investments." I clasped my hands tightly in my lap, preparing myself for disappointment. Beside me, Jackson practically vibrated with anticipation. "I'll begin with some of the smaller bequests," Harold said. "To St. Mary's Hospital, a donation of $50,000 in memory of Catherine Miller. To the local high school, $25,000 for the establishment of a trade scholarship for students entering forestry or related fields." He continued with a list of personal items left to various friends and relatives. Dad's fishing gear to his oldest friend, Mum's pearl necklace to her sister, and so on. I was mentioned a few times. Dad's collection of Western literature to me, Mum's watercolour sets and easels. Then Harold cleared his throat and looked directly at me. "Now to the primary assets." Jackson straightened in his chair, smoothing his tie. His lawyer opened a notebook, pen poised. "Regarding Thomas Miller Logging Company, with all its assets, contracts, equipment, and property," Harold read, his voice steady. "This is bequeathed in its entirety to my daughter, Ophelia Ann Miller, who has dedicated 15 years of her life to its success and growth, and who understands both its operations and its heart." The room went completely still. Jackson's smile froze, then crumbled into disbelief. "That can't be right," he interrupted. "There must be some mistake." Harold looked at him calmly. "There is no mistake, Mr. Miller. Your father was very clear about his wishes. He also left a letter explaining his decision, which I am instructed to read now." He pulled out another document and began to read, "To my children Jackson and Ophelia." If Harold is reading this letter, then I have passed on, and you are learning how I've chosen to distribute what I've built over my lifetime. These decisions weren't made lightly or in haste. Jackson, you chose a different path from the family business, and I've always respected that. You've built a successful life in New York, and I've been proud of your accomplishments from afar. But Thomas Miller Logging has been Ophelia's life for the past 15 years. While you were creating your future elsewhere, she was here learning every aspect of the business, helping it grow, sacrificing her own dreams to ensure mine continued. The company is as much hers as it ever was mine, and it's only right that it passes to her. Ophelia, you've more than earned this inheritance. You've shown dedication, intelligence, and heart in everything you've done for the company. I may not have said it enough in life, but I saw every sacrifice, every smart decision, every late night you put in. This business is your legacy now to run or to sell as you see fit." Jackson's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "She manipulated him when he was sick. This would never have happened if I'd been here." "Actually," Harold interjected, "this will was drawn up and signed 2 years ago with minor amendments 6 months ago, long before your father's illness." "What about the house?" Jackson demanded. "Surely that comes to me as his son, his male heir." Harold adjusted his glasses. "Regarding the family home and surrounding property, Thomas Miller has bequeathed this to Ophelia Ann Miller, with the provision that Jackson Thomas Miller may purchase it from her at fair market value should he wish to return to Montana permanently. Jackson slammed his fist on the table. This is outrageous. She brainwashed him. I'm contesting this will. Harold seemed unfazed by the outburst. That is your right, of course. However, you should know that your father anticipated this reaction. He had himself evaluated by 2 independent psychiatric professionals before finalizing these arrangements, and their certifications of his mental competence are on file. Additionally, he set up a trust fund for Ophelia over the past 15 years, allocating a percentage of the company's profits each quarter as deferred compensation for her work. This trust is separate from the will and not subject to contestation. I sat in stunned silence, unable to fully process what I was hearing. Dad had not only recognized my contribution, but had been actively planning to reward it for years. All those times I'd wondered if he noticed, if he cared, he had been quietly ensuring my future. There's one more thing, Harold added, reaching for a small device on the table. Your father recorded a video message to be played at this reading. He felt some things needed to be said in his own words. He pressed a button, and suddenly Dad's face appeared on a screen on the wall. He looked healthy in the recording made before his illness. His familiar features, strong and weathered, brought fresh tears to my eyes. Jackson Ophelia, the recording began. If you're watching this, then Harold is executing my will, and you've learned how I've distributed things, Jackson. I know you're probably upset. You've always felt entitled to the family business, even though you chose to build your life elsewhere. That was your right, and I respected it. But inheritance isn't just about bloodlines, it's about investment. Ophelia invested her time, her youth, her dreams in our company. That creates a stronger claim than mere biology. Ophelia, you might be surprised by all this. You shouldn't be. You earned every bit of it through years of hard work and loyalty. I know I wasn't always good at showing my appreciation, but I want you to know I saw everything you did, everything you gave up. I'm sorry I didn't make that clearer while I was still around to say it in person. I hope both of you can make peace with my decisions. And more importantly, I hope you can find a way to be family again. Life's too short for bitterness. I love you both, each in your own way. The screen went black and silence filled the room. Jackson stood abruptly, gathering his papers. This isn't over, he said, his voice tight with anger. I'll be speaking with my lawyers. He stormed out, Audrey and his entourage hurrying after him. Harold waited until the door closed behind them. I'm sorry about that, Ophelia. Your father anticipated some resistance, but he was very firm in his wishes. I nodded, still trying to process everything. Thank you, Harold, for everything. As I gathered my things to leave, Harold placed a hand on my arm. He was very proud of you, you know. He told me once that you were the best of both him and your mother. Strong but kind. Smart but compassionate. He said the company would flourish under your guidance in ways he could never have achieved. For the first time since Dad's diagnosis, I felt something like peace wash over me. I had been seen. I had been valued. And now I had a legacy to honor. I returned to the family home that evening to find Jackson frantically packing. Expensive luggage lay open on the living room floor, and Audrey was wrapping Dad's crystal whiskey tumblers in newspaper. What are you doing? I asked, though the answer was obvious. What does it look like? Jackson snapped, throwing shirts into a suitcase. We're getting out of this backward town. Don't worry, we'll be back with a legal team that will tear that fraudulent will to shreds. Put those down, I said quietly to Audrey, who froze with a crystal glass in her hand. Those aren't yours to take. According to that travesty of a will, nothing here is ours. Jackson spat. But these were Dad's favourites. He'd want me to have them. Dad wanted me to have the house and everything in it, I replied, finding a strength in my voice I hadn't known was there. That's why he put it in his will. If there are specific items you want, we can discuss it like adults, but you don't get to just take things. Jackson laughed bitterly. Suddenly you're so confident. 24 hours ago you were cowering in that little cabin while I planned the future of the business. Now you think you're in charge. I am in charge, I said simply, of the house, of the business, of my life. Dad made sure of it. Dad was manipulated, Jackson insisted, his face flushing. You played the devoted daughter, making him feel guilty about my absence. This should have been my inheritance. I'm his son. And I'm his daughter, I countered. The one who stayed, the one who learnt the business inside and out, the one who held his hand through 15 years of hard work and hard decisions. Being born male doesn't entitle you to everything he built. Jackson stepped closer, towering over me with the same intimidation tactics he'd used since we were children. You think you can run that company? You're a glorified secretary who got lucky. I have an MBA from Columbia. I've managed investment portfolios worth more than that entire logging operation. I stood my ground. And yet Dad chose me, not because I'm a woman, not because I stayed, but because I earned it. He saw something in me that you're still missing. This isn't over, Jackson hissed. I'll contest the will. I'll sue for my rightful share. I'll make sure every business associate and client knows the company is in legal jeopardy. You could do that, I acknowledged. Or you could accept Dad's decision and we could find a way forward together. The business is mine, but that doesn't mean there isn't a place for you if you actually want to be part of it, not just sell it off. Jackson's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed suspiciously. What are you talking about? I'm talking about respecting what Dad built enough not to dismantle it for quick cash. I'm talking about putting your fancy MBA to use, helping grow the company instead of liquidating it. I'm talking about being siblings instead of adversaries. For a brief moment, something shifted in Jackson's expression. A flicker of the brother I'd once known before ambition and resentment had hardened him. Then it was gone, replaced by cold determination. I don't need your charity, he said stiffly. That company is my birthright. I'll get what's mine one way or another. I sighed, the brief hope of reconciliation fading. Then we have nothing more to discuss tonight. You can stay until morning, but then I want you out of Dad's house. My house. I turned to leave, but Jackson called after me. You know what your problem is, Ophelia? You think staying put and doing what's expected makes you special. It doesn't. It makes you predictable. Boring. Dad felt sorry for you, that's why he threw you the company. A consolation prize for having no life of your own. His words were designed to wound, to make me doubt myself and Dad's decision. 2 weeks ago, they might have worked. But now, with the knowledge of Dad's careful planning and his recorded message fresh in my mind, they simply revealed Jackson's desperation. Goodbye, Jackson, I said calmly. Call me when you're ready to talk like family again. The next morning, I returned to find them gone, along with several small valuable items I was too tired to pursue. I changed the locks on both the house and the business offices that same day. In the weeks that followed, Jackson made good on his threats. His New York lawyer filed to contest the will, claiming I had exerted undue influence on Dad during his illness. The case was quickly dismissed when Harold presented documentation of the will's creation long before Dad's diagnosis, along with the psychiatric evaluations confirming Dad's competence. Jackson then attempted to rally support among the business community, calling clients and suppliers to suggest the company was in trouble under my leadership. This backfired spectacularly when most expressed confidence in me, having worked directly with me for years while Jackson had been absent. His final attempt came in the form of a letter from his lawyer, claiming Dad had verbally promised him the business during a visit 5 years earlier. Again, Harold's meticulous documentation prevailed. Dad had updated his will after that visit, reaffirming his decision to leave me the company. Finally, an email arrived from Jackson himself, terse and formal, legal avenues exhausted. Accepting Dad's decision while maintaining my belief it was unfair. Moving on with my life. Do not contact me regarding family matters further. It wasn't an apology or a reconciliation, but it was an end to the immediate conflict. And for now, that was enough. As I settled into my new role as owner of Thomas Miller Logging, I discovered something unexpected. The stress and uncertainty of the past months had been painful, but they had also burned away my self-doubt. For years, I had wondered if I was good enough, if my contributions mattered, if Dad really saw me. Now I knew. In Dad's study, which I had finally moved into, I found a hidden compartment in his desk containing his most private journal. The entries stretched back years, and many mentioned me with pride. Ophelia secured the Jensen account today through sheer persistence. Ophelia's idea to restructure the equipment leases will save us thousands. Watched Ophelia handle a crisis with the Eastern crew today. She has more natural authority than I ever did. He had seen everything. And now so did I. 6 months after the will reading, I stood in the newly remodeled offices of Thomas Miller Logging. The company logo had been updated, though I'd kept Dad's name prominent. The walls, once dark wood paneling, were now a bright white, displaying both Dad's old logging photographs and some of my own watercolor landscapes of the Montana forests where we worked. The business was thriving. I had implemented many of the changes I'd suggested to Dad over the years, but which he had been reluctant to adopt. We had expanded our sustainable forestry practices, earning certification that opened doors to eco-conscious building companies. I had modernized our fleet, invested in more efficient equipment, and improved working conditions for our crews. The old-timers who had initially been skeptical of my official leadership had come around, especially when they saw the results in increased profits and more consistent work schedules. The younger employees appreciated the company's new direction, particularly our commitment to environmental responsibility alongside productive logging. My personal life had undergone equally significant changes. Ryan and I had finally set a wedding date after 7 years of engagement. With the business stable and the inheritance issues resolved, there was no reason to wait any longer. We planned a simple ceremony in the meadow behind the family home, where Mom had once tended her garden. I had reached out to Jackson twice since his concession email. The first time was to formally offer him a position with the company, heading up a new division focused on sustainable wood products. His financial background and city connections could have been valuable. He never responded. The second time was an invitation to the wedding. His reply was brief. "Cannot attend due to prior commitments. Congratulations to you both." It wasn't warm, but it wasn't hostile either. A small step perhaps towards some future reconciliation. Audrey had filed for divorce shortly after their return to New York, according to the gossip that inevitably filtered back to our small town. Jackson's firm had also let him go, citing aggressive negotiation tactics that had alienated clients. I took no pleasure in his difficulties, only a sense of sadness at how ambition had warped the brother I once knew. One crisp fall afternoon, as golden aspen leaves drifted past my office window, Harold stopped by with some final paperwork regarding the estate. "Everything's in order," he said, placing a folder on my desk. "The last of the transfers are complete. Thomas Miller Logging is officially entirely yours." I signed the documents, feeling a sense of completion. "Thank you for everything, Harold. I don't think I could have gotten through all this without your help." Harold smiled. "Just doing my job, although I must admit delivering that will reading was one of the more satisfying moments of my career." The look on Jackson's face. He chuckled, then grew serious. "Your father was very specific about his wishes. He spent hours with me making sure everything was airtight. I never knew he was doing all that," I admitted. "He never said anything." Tom wasn't one for big declarations, but he kept a journal in my office safe. "He asked me to give it to you once everything was settled." Harold placed a leather-bound book on my desk. "His thoughts on the business, on you, on the future. Might answer some questions you still have." That night, curled up in Dad's old reading chair by the fireplace, in what was now truly my home, I opened the journal. It was different from his business journals or the personal one I'd found in his desk. This one was specifically about the company and his thoughts on its future. The entries spanned years, documenting his deliberations about succession planning. Early pages showed his assumption that Jackson would eventually return and take over. But as time passed, his perspective shifted. Jackson called today. One entry from 8 years ago read, "Wanted to know if I could guarantee a loan for some investment scheme." Not a word about the business, about his mother, about Ophelia. Just money. Meanwhile, Ophelia hasn't taken a real vacation in 3 years. She's becoming the heart of this operation, though I don't think she sees it yet. A year later. Had a health scare today. Nothing serious, but it got me thinking about what happens to all this when I'm gone. The logical choice is becoming clearer every day. Ophelia knows this business in her bones now. Jackson hasn't set foot on a logging site in a decade. The choice should be obvious, but old notions die hard. And finally, from 2 years ago, around when the will was formalized, met with Harold today to finalize everything. Leaving the business to Ophelia is the right decision, not just for her, but for the company and everyone who depends on it. She'll honor what I've built while making it better in ways I never could. Jackson will be angry, but maybe someday he'll understand that this isn't about favorites. It's about who earned it. Tears blurred my vision as I read his words. All those years I'd spent wondering if he noticed, if he valued my contribution. He had been quietly watching, evaluating, planning. He had seen me all along. The next day I visited Dad's grave, bringing fresh wildflowers and a small bottle of the good scotch he enjoyed on special occasions. I sat beside the headstone, feeling the Montana wind rustling through the pines. "I got your message, Dad," I said quietly. "All of them. I'm running the company the way you taught me, but also making some changes I think you'd approve of. We're doing well. Everyone still misses you, but we're carrying on." I poured a small measure of scotch onto the earth. "I wish you had told me how you felt while you were still here. But I understand why you did things your way. You wanted me to stand on my own feet, to know I'd earned my place. I get it now. As I drove back home along the familiar winding road past the forest my family had responsibly harvested for 2 generations, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since before Dad's illness. The inheritance wasn't just about property or a business, it was about legacy, about values, about seeing the quiet dedication that often goes unrecognized. I had always been the steady one, the reliable daughter who stayed while her brother sought glory elsewhere. For most of my life, I had viewed that as somehow lesser, as if choosing stability over adventure somehow made me less worthy. Now I understood that there was its own kind of strength and steadfastness, its own kind of courage and commitment. The business was mine now, not because I was Dad's daughter, but because I had proven myself its rightful steward through years of dedication. The house was mine, because I had made it a home when others had left. The respect of our employees and clients was mine, because I had earned it day by day, decision by decision. Jackson had laughed at my inheritance, assuming his gender and status as firstborn son would override my years of service. He had whispered his cruel predictions, confident in a system that too often rewards the wrong things. His smile had vanished when he realized that in our family, at least, actions spoke louder than assumptions. I had kept quiet through his mockery, his dismissals, his attempts to claim what wasn't his. And in the end, that quiet dignity had its own power. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words, especially when followed by the voice of justice. Have you ever been underestimated by family or watched someone take credit for your hard work? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to hear more stories, and share with someone who might need a reminder that sometimes karma works exactly as it should. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that your quiet contributions matter even when it seems no one is noticing.